My name is Musharrat. On this slide, you can see my affiliation. I'm leading the Decolonising the Curriculum Strategy for Allied Health Professions at London Southwark University, and I'm going to abbreviate Allied Health Professions to AHP going forward. I am a dark-skinned South Asian woman of Bangladeshi heritage, a British national. I am in a privileged position to have a salaried job in academia, a roof over my head, and able to afford food and heating. I have had to do a lot of unlearning and learning as I progress in facilitating the decolonising approach and continue to do so. I try and find opportunities to use my privilege to access people with power and influence to support the decolonising actions, and I consciously check in with myself to decenter myself within the work. I'll say more about my activities as we move through the presentation, but the presentation is really some of my reflections from my experiences so far in decolonising the curriculum. So, why the title? It is a provocation, isn't it? I will start off with a quote by Jairo Funes Flores, 2023. Coloniality of curriculum is an enduring violent pedagogical act that systematically subjugates and destroys other interpretations. Its main goal is for everyone to interpret the world through the dominant white male gaze and its concomitant concepts, theories, and histories. Modern or colonial ideas, concepts, theories, methodologies, pedagogies, histories, aesthetics, values, affects, ways of knowing, sensing, being, and relating are all being re-embedded and reproduced. End quote. The reflection framework I will organise my presentation around is by Smith, 1989, a white male Australian academic. The framework is relevant to use when there is power imbalance, when the person reflecting feels disempowered by the establishment. The confront slide will focus on the provocation, but I need to lead into it. So here I go. This is a word cloud response from students when asked the question, what are the barriers to curriculum transformation to enable everyone to belong? Cast your eyes over the words. The racial hierarchies and disparities continue in contemporary universities. How do they continue to be sustained in universities? The problem is that whiteness and coloniality are dominating curricula, education, and the institutions. Whiteness refers to the construct. It is the systems of power and advantages that is afforded to persons racialized as white. Coloniality is currently in play in the education systems. Coloniality refers to the characteristics of colonialism, that is, the values, principles, episteme, and power structures upheld as normative by Western societies and serve to rationalize and perpetuate Western centrism to maintain the power difference, hence continuing the racial hierarchies and disparities. The colonial yardstick states you are human or superior if you are male, white, Christian, financially well off, educated, English speaking, able bodied, heterosexual, and much more. For example, an outcome from coloniality in processes and procedures is resulting in the continuing racial awarding gap or the ethnicity pay gap. Professor Leon Tickley says, we are looking towards decolonising the curriculum because we want to disrupt the 5 monocultures of knowledge. Wilkinson and Zuby, 2021. 1. Exclusive focus on westernised science and philosophy. 2. Naturalisation of difference between humans. 3. Dominance of Western ideas of progress. 4. Normalcy of Western knowledge globally. 5. Capitalist monopoly of knowledge production. When you start on deciding to go with the decolonising curriculum approach, you really want to align yourself with a description of decolonising that you want to work from. For me, this description on the slide is referred to because it communicates the harm, violence, oppression, and dispossession created by colonialisation of indigenous and minoritized knowledges and ways of knowing, and hence why there is a need for a decolonising approach. In brief, decolonisation is the complex interplay between politics, economics, knowledges, and cultures from the global south, and human rights for emancipation. And it is fueled by actions to disrupt racism, patriarchy, or benevolence, and coloniality. Decolonisation is the theory. Decolonising is being continuously active in actions for decolonisation, and decoloniality is praxis, conceptualizing conditions for enacting undoing coloniality. Hence, I refer to what I'm involved in as decolonising the curriculum and the university. It is ongoing because the foundations are corrupted and institutional racism, whiteness, and coloniality are waste that keep coming into the system. Decolonising actions are to keep on abating the waste. Hence, the principles and the practices of the institution has to be interrogated too. And decolonising change actions happen at this level as well to disrupt the corrupted foundations. From this then, decolonising is not inclusive curriculum, but does integrate inclusive principles. It is not just anti-racist practice, but does include that, and it is not internationalisation. Decolonising interrogates not only what knowledges and episteme that are included and excluded, not only about representation, because looking at the current government, don't get me started, but decolonising doesn't shy away from politics because education is political. Decolonising asks, who is delivering the knowledge and why? Who isn't and why? Who is working on policies and procedures that impact curriculum delivery and hence student outcomes, and many more questions? Decolonising is not just curriculum change, but pedagogy, about culture change, about political engagement, about human rights, about the university and its connection to its local community. And you can keep on adding more. Do you see now why decolonising the curriculum is wider than inclusive or anti-racist curriculum approach? Also, let me be clear, decolonising is not an EDI strategy. It can run parallel. Decolonising is another university strategy commitment. EDI is a relatively new convention and it is corporate facing for compliance and control. Decolonising started as soon as colonialisation came into play. It has history in struggle. In February 2021, the University Academic Board at LSBU agreed 8 vision statements for action regarding decolonising the university in response to the Office of Students' call to action for all universities to reduce their racial degree awarding gap. The vision statements were formed in collaboration with the Student Union, Professional Services, Academics, and Centre for Research at LSBU. Following this, the university hired a decolonising research fellow. I work alongside the full-time appointed decolonising research fellow at our university, Megha Kashia. I believe Megha's appointment is the only permanent full-time post that I know of for this role and not a project time limited contract. And I think this indicates LSBU's commitment for the decolonising approach for the long term. Megha, in her role, is growing actions for LSBU's decolonising vision for the whole university going forwards. At London South Bank University, overall, in the AHP school, we have a wide diversity of populations in student cohorts, but not in the lecture teams. They remain dominantly racialised as white. Additionally, the administration staff for our courses remain in lower paid jobs and are heavily represented from Black and minoritized populations. There is a racial degree awarding gap in most of the AHP courses. There are trends in the data showing that Black and Asian students failing assessments and placements more so than their racialized white peers. The LSBU trends is not very different from the data from other universities nationally. And I guess I ask you, why do you think this continues with different cohorts? So in AHP at LSBU from second semester of the academic year 2020-2021, we started to consider what to do, and our starting point of consideration was the racial awarding gap. Prior to this, I had already formed and convened two groups in response to the students' requests after the murder of George Floyd. One of the groups was formed in October 2020, the Race and Cultural Equity Group, Race G, for students and staff racialized as Black, Asian, and minoritized to openly, safely, and confidentially discuss challenges and good things regarding their university experiences, to support each other, to lean in, and to problem solve ways forward. And these groups help to start identify the good stuff and barriers and contradictions in AHP in relation to the workings of the university's policies and practices. For example, the complaints process regarding any claims of racism by students while on placement was not fit for purpose. The claims got shut down instead of exploring, learning, and potentially changing from the situations being raised. At the AHP school, there was a tendency for a consultative relationship with students, that is, extracting their feedback and keeping the students at arm's length. It is a power dynamic imbalance. And again, ask yourself, what is the catastrophe in partnering with Black, Indigenous, and minoritized students? Why keep them at arm's length? So the decolonising approach and its actions are formed from multiple perspectives in collaboration and partnership with Black, Indigenous, and minoritized students, and the actions must be at multiple levels. If you are not doing this, you are not following the decolonising approach because you are not centering the Black and minoritized students' voices and hence recolonising the curriculum as you are returning to coloniality and whiteness. The behaviour, the culture, the thinking, the delivery, the data, and so on are feedback from reality of what is occurring in the environment. The purpose or many purposes of the education system or institution is represented by what it is doing or what it currently does. For example, if the system is delivering an end outcome of racial disparities, then that is one of its purposes, to deliver racial disparities. Do you see? You cannot belong to a place that was not designed for you, cannot profit or gain opportunities from an organization that never had you in mind. These are the feelings of Black and minoritized students and staff. When you don't include the very people harmed by the institution at the transformation table, this then limits the potential of a diversity of creativity and innovations available to institutions for impactful transformations. Isla Emery Whittington, on a Twitter post 2023, poignantly and poetically stated, "If colonialism is the platter that serves the meal, then there is no real choice to refuse it." End quote. If that is the only sustenance available, then no wonder we are here in this predicament. After I did some education sessions on decolonising the curriculum for the AHP teams and students and sourced money for an external to deliver an anti-racist practice workshop for AHP students and staff, this helped the AHP staff to get behind the university's 8 vision statements on decolonising the university. However, the staff went back to the usual practice and their actions were recolonising the curricula because they were in an echo chamber, no disruption of the status quo. There was a cognitive disconnect. They either didn't want to change or felt overwhelmed in how to change, and they did not engage with me meaningfully. Actions that started to happen early on at the beginning, for example, AHP courses teams decided they would offer different options for end of module assessment methods for student submissions instead of the traditional coursework. And the staff decided what those options should be with no engagement with Black and minoritized students. So their actions is recolonising the curriculum because they're keeping the status quo of keeping the decision making to themselves. Another example, AHP courses also deciding what content to deliver and how they will deliver the content regarding racism in medicine, health disparities, inequity in service provision, and more, with no engagement with Black and minoritized students. So again, their action is recolonising the curriculum, keeping the status quo of decision making and change ongoing. Another example, the leads in AHP were going outwards and discussing the decolonising approach for AHP, framing it as an EDI initiative, which is damaging as it causes confusion. This is recolonising, decolonising, as you are framing it as coloniality. The resistance I had at the beginning, and it is so much lesser now, is the willful ignoring, the silence, the projection of hurt feelings because of personalisation of structural deficits and barriers being pointed out, mainly from the staff group, but also from some students. This is whiteness showing up in my emails and in interactions towards me for putting myself forward in leading this work and not really getting support to deal with the people showing up towards me with whiteness. But however, all this is coloniality in play and recolonising the curriculum as status quo of harm to Black and minoritized groups, mostly unchecked. But this has improved. It was also difficult to get any interest from Black, Asian and minoritized students to join us. Staff had an expectation that the students should join in the work for free, thus immediately devaluing their contribution. This is asking for free labour from Black and brown and minoritized bodies. This is coloniality replay, that's recolonising the curriculum. And I've got more examples, but I'll just rest with those for the moment. But can you see a pattern? What was happening was cognitive disengagement. They asked me to provide resources, so I did. They said they needed workshops. Tick, I did. They tried to keep me on a treadmill of give, give, give. To them at that point, this was showing that they were being involved. They just expected me to do it all. To educate them, to decide decisions, to implement actions. Um, just one person, me, instead of joining in for them to take accountability to improve their knowledge and understanding on decolonising the curriculum. They couldn't see the downstream view of the decolonising approach for curriculum transformation. You have to unlearn the way you have been delivering and designing curriculum. Decolonising is not removing the content that is currently part of the curriculum, but asking who you have not integrated into the content that would speak truth. For example, about racism, disparities, and what changes has the discipline engaged in to abate these harms. Think about who you need to connect with. How do you cross boundaries to enable decolonising the curriculum and university? Also think about who is the uni partnering with to make profit. For example, is it with a country with poor human rights? What are the ethical and moral discussions here to raise? And who is going to do that? Open your minds and eyes to start reimagining a better way for the curriculum and for your students and you. Plato says, well begun is half done. And really, with decolonising, you have to start right, start authentically, but don't play act decolonising approach going forwards. There is a disconnect because decolonising the curriculum doesn't happen in a vacuum. Separate to the university must be all in and show support visibly. Decolonising has to be a total package. But for me, I persisted with support from the Dean of the AHP School, and we are at the tipping point and have started on the path of decolonising change. So what changed in the Allied Health School? We now have a core task force for decolonising the curriculum. We have Black and minoritized students at the table and we are paying them. The first meeting happened in April and the dynamic was different. And what was important to the students was, in some respects, different from what the staff had preconceptions about. There are actions for the team that will be reviewed at the next meeting in the first semester of the next academic year. So decolonising the university will take on a myriad of activities across faculties at different levels, but leadership is key here to access resources and money and to give staff doing this work time out to do it. It is a non-starter if this isn't in place consistently. If this isn't in place, then we are back to recolonising, extracting extra labour and burdening labour for free. If you want decolonising to eventually sustain and embed, start ethically, be moral in your outlook as leaders and seniors. Dobbin et al. 2007, in their seminal paper on successful diversity actions in corporate America, a survey that spanned 31 years on 800 plus organizations, found success was built on three things when it came to improving and sustaining diversity and culture change. And I transfer this to aid embedding the decolonizing approach. What is needed is leadership at the top at every level, committed to the change and able to support the changes with staffing, resources, and monies. The next is a team tasked to implement the changes and monitor and evaluate, and also given power to hold the organisation and the course teams to account. And the third is a mentorship program where the organisation has sourced mentors to support Black, Indigenous and minoritized staff and students because they gain access to opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise if they didn't have a mentor. And this helps with their career progression and success and satisfaction. All this impacts the students' commitment, care, and quality of actions. So, to be clear, decolonising is not diversity, equality, or inclusivity initiatives, nor just anti racist practice, nor to do with representation statistics. Decolonising does not start with its attention on improving marginalised groups in general. Decolonising is whole institutional transformation through centering Black, Indigenous, and minoritized groups. Okay, I agree. Diversifying knowledges could possibly lead to diversifying course teams and wider staff in the university, and not congregating Black and minoritized staff in the lower paid jobs. But it is not guaranteed unless it is in strategy and driven by culture change. Culture change starts from the top of the institution. Decolonising the curriculum includes, for example, decolonising knowledge, decentering Western centrism, inserting widening epistemologies, ways of knowing and being known that have been excluded. But this does not happen in a vacuum. The university needs decolonising too. Professor Leon Tickley of Bristol University states that there are three pillars for decolonising the university: decolonising the curriculum, democratising the university, and decolonising the research. It is incumbent on all of us in higher education to take on the burden to make this change for a better society. Decolonising is urgent for Black, Indigenous and minoritized students and staff to thrive in higher education by decentering coloniality and whiteness, and it is all our responsibilities to change this because Black, Indigenous and minoritized populations did not create this problem. Deep interrogation is needed. We have to work with Black, Indigenous and minoritized students, bring them round the table, pay them for their labour. If you haven't centred them, then you are recolonising your change process. Start with action soon, no matter how small. Start somewhere, and because of complexity, you will go everywhere. We have known about the data for Black, Indigenous, minoritized students in higher education for decades, but we have not been radical in how to transformatively change. What we have done is tinker, and while we've been tinkering, Black, Indigenous and minoritized students continue to be harmed by the education system, and we are part of that system that is enabling this. The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. And I think I've just quoted Walt Disney. I'm not sure, but I think I have. I don't know why. Leaders and seniors need to show commitment, making opportunities for staff to do this work, planning in for resources and monies in the budget for decolonising change. Because if they don't, no matter what change is happening on the shop floor, it will eventually fail Because why? Because your decolonising activity is recolonising the institution. Decolonising is unique in that it centres the voices of Black, Indigenous and minoritized students, not to problematise or essentialise them, but to collaborate with them, sharing knowledge and expertise for the benefit of all students and staff. Because you are dealing with the core knotty problem of institutional racism, coloniality and whiteness in higher education. So that's my provocation presentation. Those are my details to contact me if you wish to. I'd love to hear from you. And because it's a provocation, I've got questions for the audience, and these are my questions. And I'm just going to come out. Oh, I'm sorry, folks. I don't know why my slide is not coming up now. But I'll actually say the questions if it doesn't come up.
Or Musharrat, if you have them, you can just post them in the chat and we can.
Can you see them now?
Oh yes, it's come up now.
Okay, so those are my 3 provocation questions for my provocation. Yeah, do join me in discussions now.
If anyone does want to respond to it, I think at this point you're more than welcome to illuminate your cameras if you prefer, but you don't have to. But if you're happy to go on mic, then absolutely. If not, you can always respond to any questions with a typed answer in the chat, and I'm happy to read those out for you. But don't hesitate to drop your mic on if that's something you'd prefer to do.
I'm just putting the questions also in the chat one by one, so you have them as well. Yeah, so you're all interested in the topic of decolonising the curriculum. So what do you think? What is happening? What is challenging? Oh, Melanie, you've got your hand up.
Hiya, hi Musharrat.
Hello.
Thank you so much for that provocation. I thought it was great from beginning to end. I was trying hard not to start ranting on LinkedIn, you spitting truths all the way through this. It's been great, and I think it's an excellent way to end off the series. But I think I am, maybe for your thoughts, maybe for others in the audience, I am very interested in understanding the interplay between different elements of decolonising the university, where there are instances where people are trying to decolonise the curriculum, and talking about decolonising the curriculum in isolation from understanding how that plays into a wider conversation, as you've said, around decolonising the university. And I think we're having that conversation now at BCU around decolonising the curriculum. That's not enough, because it doesn't operate, the curriculum doesn't operate in isolation. It's part of our core deliverable of education. So how do we attack some of it and not all of it? How do we attack the right bits of it first, without missing the other important parts? And yeah, I think it becomes extremely complex when you realise that you can't just go about decolonising the curriculum, but there's a bigger, wider conversation to be had. So I'm just interested in your experience with that conversation, and kind of where do you start and then where do you go, and how do you know that it's enough or acceptable to kind of, for those of us who are in this conversation and doing this work, you want to see it start right, but I don't know, I find it really hard to find where to start. And we don't think we should stop at the curriculum itself. I don't think it works for us at BCU that we say we're going to decolonise the curriculum, because we recognise that it's a much bigger issue than just the curriculum.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you see, decolonising in different nations is different when it comes to education systems, people, all that context is really important. And for us, I mean, well, for me, I'm in the heart of the metropole, the belly of the beast. I'm in London. So what was really important, and I started this unlearning as I was going along. I've only come to this point, not that long ago. I started 3 years ago, got here, but always really understanding, what does it mean? What does decolonising mean when it comes to education, higher education, and really embedding myself in that. And then what happened was the Office of Students call came, and every university had to do their access and participation plans. And while I was reading the critical race theory stuff, the thing about interest conversion came up. And also reading, because I'm doing a PhD on service improvement. It's painful. And in there also there's a book by John Dorcoing, What Matters Gets Actioned. And the two were starting to make sense for me. And I started to think, okay, where is it that I need to go to? Because there is enthusiasm at the grassroots. You know, people want to do change. They're not sure how to do it. But then when we want to do it, we're being then stopped by, well, the policy says you can't, yeah? Or, you know, the regulators would disagree or oppose or whatever things. And then I started reading some more and I was like, well, how do we craft a way forward when we know there are certain entrenchments like national regulators or policies? How do we still do the core business of decolonising education? And reading more and more, I realised you can't just have one action, decolonising the curriculum, because it won't sustain unless it's part of strategy. So how do I get people involved who are involved in the strategy? So I took a year out to do a teaching fellow to get more understanding about decolonising. Within that, I then designed this decolonising the curriculum wheel. It's not a toolkit. It's not a one way to do something. It's an interrogation wheel. It's asked you to interrogate every bit of the university, including the curriculum, including the higher levels. And once I did that, I got noticed by two people higher up who were interested because it looked familiar. It started to look like it matters, right? It started to engage them. And once I, in a way, hooked them, I started to unveil some of the data that was about and how it hadn't changed with, and all the different initiatives like inclusive framework and all the other stuff that had been going, and it hadn't changed anything. So once I got them in, they started using their power and influence to start the ball rolling. And I could then go back to my AHP team and work with them. But you have to find that interest conversions. What is it? And they'll always say, but there's no data. But things never started every time with evidence base. It started with evidence informed change. You hear, you go and look at what's out there in the literature and the theories, and you start to plan change. That's how the world is. It didn't always start with a done deal of evidence basis. So, you know, we had these difficult conversations. We're still having them. I'm telling you, we're still having the conversations, but we have inched forward, and we have got data now that shows that our racial awarding, degree awarding gap has changed significantly for some courses because we're keeping to the decolonising approach. We're keeping true to it. We're not diluting it and making it other approaches. I hope that helps. But you've got to get that interest convergence with the people at the top. I know everyone says, oh, it is the collective grassroots that will change things. They will bring the noise to the leaders, but the leaders have the money and the power.
Thank you.
Thanks, Musharrat. I was wondering about what you said about culture change at the top, and I know that at very prestigious universities, headhunted professors have been told that they can't include the word decolonising in university strategies. And I myself applied a very small internal fund, and wanted to use the word decolonising, and I was told to take it out if I wanted the money at all to be considered for the money. So I don't understand how it can always start at the top. And also on another note, I was wondering, you said you had data. I was wondering how you were monitoring and if you were measuring, how you were measuring the change and the impact of decolonising work.
Yeah. So quite a few questions there. So I always say to people that decolonising is an approach. It's not the only approach. Okay. So there might be that you might mix some of your approaches together, and that's fine, but it's not going to be decolonising. Yeah. And what's your other question about how do you get leaders engaged? Did you say? Sorry, Martin.
Yeah, like some university executive boards just are so fragile that they won't. I know the Black and Asian community wanted the word decolonising included on university strategy. They were trying to insist on it, and in the final hour, they just totally ignored and it was taken out of the university strategy.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know.
So I think if there is some level of engagement with the exec boards in creating the change, if they don't want to go to decolonising right now, and that's an approach you want, but at the moment they don't want to go there, then ask them what are the approaches they want to go to. Because I have to ask that it can't always be the grassroots saying, well, we want decolonising. They say, no, we don't want it. Then what is it they want? Where is the interest convergence? You've really got to work at finding that. I think it takes a lot of work to find that. And a lot of, and like I say, I'm still working on that, a lot of back and forth, keeping a check on it, really asking those difficult questions. Which ones are they willing to engage with which ones we'll have to park because we can't go everywhere. And also regarding the measurement. So because we started the whole journey from the Office of Students call for reducing the racial degree awarding gap, we are monitoring that, and we've got to clean up our data. It's not it needs to have more disaggregation, but it is showing definitely a good trend forwards. But also we're going to look at belonging, because that was another marker that the students at the university were very on the thematic analysis. It was something that was coming up, that they did not feel belonging either. So we're going to work on that, and we're currently looking at what measure could we use. Is there something that needs to be researched and developed, or is there something that is out there that contextually we can use as well? Does that answer all your questions, Martin?
Yeah, that was great. I was just wondering if it does, if it fits, if you're overcoming an attainment gap, then a lot of people will probably jump on board, because it's all about recruitment and attainment gaps, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's the interest convergence, because with decolonising in a corrupted foundation, still education is still a business, it's still a market, and that's why I say it's decolonising. It's about abating waste coming into the system. It's not decolonisation. We are not doing that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'm just going to jump in quickly just before anyone else does, and just say there's been a couple of questions asked in chat, so I'll pose them to you one by one just to make sure they're answered as well. So you've had from Michael Cole: is there ring-fenced funding for this work at your institution, and if so, what percentage of revenue is it, and is there a target percentage?
Oh, and I don't know all the answer to that, but I know there is. But I don't know how much. I seriously don't know. Maybe Mega would know that. But yes, there is money, because we've got the 8 vision statements that the academic board got agreed to. It's now part of strategy, so it now has monies involved. Hence, we hired Mega. and hence we are now coordinating the leads of each of the courses on faculties. So yes, and like I get 2 days a week out of teaching commitments, and there's someone paid to cover me part-time for those 2 days a week. So there is monies involved, and it has been put in place. But I can't answer in detail that question.
That's fine. And just one more from the chat as well that I've seen so far from a Josephine Gabby. How are we approaching decolonial work? What tools are we using? Decolonial work might look different for Black, Indigenous and minoritized students and staff and white students and staff.
Okay, so decolonising starts with the voices of the people, the Black and minoritized people that are harmed by the system. That's the approach. So we started, well, we started incorrectly in that as soon as we had the education, the workshops, everything around decolonising, the staff just went away and said, okay, I understand it. I will do it again from my own lens and not getting together with the Black and minoritized students. Now, we can't get together with all the students, but we have a subset of the courses coming around the table, and those will change as students graduate and leave. So we will get a diversity of thinking coming in as we get more regularized with how we're doing this. But decolonising is about Black and minoritized students, not every marginalized student. So it must come from that perspective. And it was actually uncomfortable for the staff group at the beginning because they couldn't get their heads around it. And actually, and when we started talking about it, what they were doing was, in a way, saying that identities such as being a woman, being LGBT plus, being in the lower economic band, all this doesn't apply to Black and minoritized students in how they were conversing, because they're saying you have to bring in everybody, you know. But the intersecting identities and characteristics were there in the Black and minoritized students too. So we were dealing with those things as well. Yeah. I see Melanie's hand up again.
Can you hear me? But the question's starting to kind of evolve into the chat, and I'm just interested in your views on it and maybe others as well. One of the challenges I have in this conversation around decolonising higher education is this view that we have to fit into the concept of measurements that come through from the regulator and have been standardised across UK higher education as measurements for success. So the assumption that, you know, even we talked about just now, you were just talking about Black and minoritized students and the intersections of those different characteristics around low socioeconomic background, and so on and so forth. I think my view of it is when we look at these characteristics of students, we are oftentimes missing some of the fundamental issues that these students are experiencing by grouping them into these characteristics. That's number one. But two, should we, or even can we, is what one of the things that Josephine was saying, can we actually, George, sorry, said that, measure decolonial work through these statistics? I was at a UUK conference that happened not long ago about the awarding gap, and a colleague was comparing institutions that have decolonising agendas with their awarding gaps. And I did go off a bit in the chat because I don't know that that's an effective measure. I don't know that the two, I don't think that one leads to the other. I don't necessarily think that decolonising and decoloniality is going to lead to better awarding gaps based on how we measure student success. And that kind of brings it back, if you track back the question of how do we measure student success? Well, we measure it through assessment, but are our assessments appropriate? Are we reinforcing colonial legacies by saying that students have to learn and be assessed in a particular type of way? the quality and standards frameworks that we operate within in the UK higher education sector, how does that reinforce colonial ideologies? And we know that it does, because it speaks to a certain type of intelligence, and we know that intelligence in itself is a harmful construct.
Yeah.
So I really wonder about,
Yeah.
You talked about the hook, and people started talking about APP, and that's absolutely a hook, because everybody now has to reduce their awarding gaps, ethnicity awarding gaps. But if we're trying to come up with solutions based on decoloniality, is it realistic to assume that we can use these metrics and even these approaches? One of my favorite books that started me on this journey was a book by Linda Twee about research and decolonial indigenous research methodologies. And it's that thing of just the word research and the way that we conduct research has its own colonial legacy that's extremely harmful to indigenous people.
Yeah.
Should we be conducting research and measuring outcomes and buying into that colonial approach of metrics and measurement, or does decolonising need its own version of assessment to see if it's working? And then is it something that needs to work, or is it just supposed to be a way that we live that is different, and it allows for difference but doesn't necessarily have to conform to the system? And I guess that goes back to the question I asked initially about where do we start?
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. It's a big old thing, right? And it's an unraveling. I call it unraveling because you have to start somewhere, but you have to start right, and it will start to unravel. And we are already started on our unraveling, because we've started looking at certain things like the rubrics that we use for assessment. If I said to anyone in the at the university, how do you show that this rubric is anti-racist? Let's start there. How do you show it? Who decided on the rubrics? What was it based on? So we're looking at that. So it's multi-level things. The other thing is we're looking at is how we conduct assessments. Does it have to be, if it's coursework that you're looking at, does it have to be written? Could it be audio recorded? Could it be any other ways? Do we have to stay through one principled way because that's what it said in the validated document? And we're starting to unravel as we're going forwards. And your questions are very valid. We're still in that system that created the problem. How do we claim to be decolonising when we're still working under that system? Yeah. And it's about chipping away, and we're using that approach to create transformation. Whether we get to completely and truly following and showing decolonising, unless society and laws and those things change, we will never be doing that. So what we are doing is abating the waste and creating an unraveling that will create change that was meant to be, for everyone. But it starts with Black and minoritized peoples. And Linda Toohey says that in the research book. You can't just make it with the same people in power, who are usually white and male, from that perspective, from that knowledge, redesigning the system. You can't do it. That's not redesigning. That's doing the same again under a different guise. So Melanie, you're not going to get to that utopia, but we have to disrupt the system. And this is an approach to start unraveling the system. And yes, you may get to the point where the metrics may have to change, because they're not the ones that are representative of the decolonial praxis. But you have to start somewhere. You have to get in there. How do you hook to get in there? And these ideas of what was it? Sipo Satel talked about transformation from the head, heart and hands. You know, you start off very much intellectually, you have to grab emotionally, and then you get actions that relate to reality. And that's why when I say to people, if you're telling me there's a racial degree awarding gap in your university, then your university is actually designed to do that. That's their outcome. So how are you going to stop that outcome? You've got to start somewhere to do the unraveling. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you. No, it does. I actually wrote a blog about the decolonial fissures not long ago because it was like, it was something that I could hold on to. It's just sometimes when you get back into the conversation, it becomes so hard for you to decide where you want to start the unraveling without completely disregarding another element of it. But you're right, just need to remember to just start somewhere and just keep.
And it will go everywhere, because for us, it has started to. So it might have started with my wheel and another place in the law faculty who were doing it. But now, because we've got Mega, she's being able to join up, and it's starting to unravel in different places and different levels. And we just have to we can't do it on our own, we have to do it collectively, but we need people from the top to join us in that collective action. And I think I remember you saying that last year. I think I read that blog, your decolonial fissures. I think you said it last year. Thank you for reminding us.
Can I ask a quick question, Musharrat?
Who's that?
It's Martin again, sorry.
Oh, hello, Martin.
Sorry, I was just wondering, because you seem to be quite forgiving of EDI, the industry, but
Forgiving?
just of it, I don't know, forgiving maybe, or accepting. I find it very, because of my experience and how I understand it, I find it just too corporate to engage with, I can't even find the words now. Sorry, I started something that I can't finish.
Martin, can I interject? With EDI, I mean, they were brought in to keep control and compliance, and that is their job. But I keep it very, and Mega and I are definitely keeping it very separate. And if they start to say it's a EDI strategy, we are not having that, because it's nothing to do with the EDI. They have their place in a Western institution. They have their place, right? How well it's worked is another matter, but that's their business for the moment, and we tackle it by keeping it very separate to the decolonising work. But again, that's another tension that keeps coming up.
There's just a question in chat that I can actually answer, which is just from Isfa. The recording will be sent out once we finish the session, which I'll probably have to wrap up at the end of this, just as I'm conscious that we're scheduled for 2 and people might have appointments and such. When I wrap this up, the recording will end, and it will claim to be, if you log back into this session, it will claim that you can watch it on the chat. If you're an external member, it won't let you watch it at that point. However, we do intend to upload to all of our various social media channels, in particular YouTube. So give us a little bit of time just to review everything, and things will be out and available for everyone. So yes, as I say, I think we are very close to wrapping up, so I'll have to just sort of say thank you on behalf of BCU and on behalf of everyone in the chat. Musharrat, this was a very fascinating discussion, and I think one of the most animated chats we've had of the whole series. So we're delighted to have had you here today, and I wish you and everyone else in the chat a good rest of the day.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to the audience too. Okay, bye. I hope you have a nice rest of the week. Bye-bye.